Hey everyone, I'm just giving a little bit more time for some people to join in. We'll just have a few more minutes. While we're waiting, if you'd like, um, depending on if you've been on Zoom before, if you hover over your own picture, you can see those three dots. And if you're interested, you can change your name on there. So as far as any discussion or questions, I have the name I would like to be called as far as Sol. My pronouns are he, him. And I put that I'm from Seattle, Washington, just in case there's people from maybe in different places. That could be kind of fun. So if you'd like to have those up. We'll just give a little bit more time. It's 11:05, so maybe just a few more minutes. All right. So just a quick check-in. Due to COVID-19, I mean, I am at home as well. So if you hear any noises of my dog Draco, I gave him a rawhide to try and minimize the noise, but sometimes you can't control everything. So just a heads up, he may make an appearance. And I am going to put this into share screen. So it's 11:08, so just to be respectful of time, I think I'm gonna start just because there is some material I wanna be able to get through. And first of all, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate having this time and space to be able to share some of the knowledge that I have gained in the last few years. A little bit about myself. My name is Sol Silvereye. Some of you may know me as Mel LaBelle. For today's purposes, I'm going to be going by Sol. My pronouns are he, him, and I am in Seattle, Washington. Originally, I'm from New England. I was born in a small mountain village of Bethlehem, about 1,800 people, and started into witchcraft at 13, as many of my generation sometimes do. I was solitary for a number of years, moved around the country, practicing and learning. And it wasn't until here, within the last 5 years or so, that I became part of a coven, Spectrum Grove here in Seattle, Washington, part of the Sylvan tradition. Um, for my first degree project, one of the ideas was to learn something and bring it back to the coven that no one is doing yet. And one of the things I had always been fascinated was alchemy, chemistry, and no one in my coven was doing that. So I went out to figure out what can I learn. What I found was the book Real Alchemy by Robert Allen Bartlett. I have references at the end. And following the book, he kind of showed how to do alchemy without all the expensive equipment, something he called guerrilla alchemy, which is what I want to share today, where how can we, step into this millennia-long tradition of which so many people before us have learned and taught and made trial and error for us to use today, and how can we use that moving forward for our own healing and for the healing of others, without spending a whole bunch of money. So today, what I really wanted to do, in honor of ancestors, is kind of look at a lot of the theory around alchemy and around the medicinal work of it. Look at some actual, creating of medicines, and then a little bit of history. Some of the slides may seem as like they go along together. They may seem as if they may be a little disjointed, but I promise they all come together to create one big sort of theory as far as how we can really work on creating medicines to heal ourselves. And as we do so, heal those around us and heal those behind us and in forward. If at any time, if you have any questions, I'm open to people asking. This is my first time doing a presentation via Zoom in this format. So I have asked Rachel to assist with some of that moderation. But if you do have a question, I don't know if there's like a hand raising tool on here, or I know there is a bit of a chat. That might be a little bit difficult with me going through, but if you want to unmute yourself to sort of pop in, we can figure that out as we go. So kind of jumping right in. As above, so below. So the 7 Hermetic principles, really starting off with these principles, these laws that govern the universe, and how many people look at alchemy as a pillar of magic, with the other pillars being astrology and theurgy, or divine worship. So as far as today, we're going to be going through some of these principles. Technically, though, they all get touched on, whether that be magical or mundane. There are a few that I will be calling out probably more often than others, but for the most part, the 7 Hermetic principles really come through, and they really, when having awareness of them, can actually increase the power of what we're doing. So the first law, all is mental. Mentalism is all is one. This idea that there is this prima materia, the first matter, and that everything comes from that. This is an infinite mass. This picture is of a famous alchemist, Dr. Philosopher Paracelsus. And this quote was really the quote that inspired this workshop for me. As above, so below. Stars are us, so a star above will heal us. And going through the slides, what I really want to share is how we can break that down and look at what about the stars are healing, and how can we connect to them even more so than perhaps we already have been? So to do that, I want to kind of start at the beginning. So prima materia, this infinite all matter. When the one sees a reflection of itself, it becomes two. And so the same with prima materia, when it saw a reflection of itself, it saw that itself was both fixed and moving. This is known as the celestial salt and the celestial niter. The celestial salt is that philosophical station structure, whereas the celestial niter is that philosophical volatile movement energy. And again, as one sees a reflection of itself, it knows itself and then becomes two. The celestial salt then becomes earth and water, and the celestial niter, air and fire. Now, these aren't typical, the four elements that we have on earth. These are philosophical, meaning these are more of the perfect idea of what this element would be. These are above what any of us could work on or work with as far as tools. And so in order to actually be able to somewhat come close to working with them, we have to work in combination with some of their attributes. And that is when the philosophical earth and water combine to make salt, which is the body, which is the stable, the physical, that which can be touched. The air and the fire combine to become the sulfur, that is the soul, that is the essential being of what is herb, animal, mineral, metal. And then the lesser of the fixed, as far as the less fixed, and the less of the volatile, the water and the air, they act as a bridge to connect the fixed and the volatile. And this bridge is known as the Mercury, the communication between the two. The Mercury is the spirit. So to kind of touch on some of these three aspects of salt, mercury, and sulfur, let's define them a little bit more. So alchemical sulfur, alchemical mercury, and alchemical salt. So here's the thing with alchemy. It likes to repeat certain words a lot. You're going to hear a lot of salt, a lot of sulfur, a lot of mercury. And depending on symbols, depending on identifiers such as philosophical or alchemical, it can be a little bit difficult to figure out, are they talking about sodium chloride salt, or are they talking about a physical body, such as an herb? I'm not sure if that is more of a translation issue, but even in Latin, a lot of this was relatable. And again, it kind of goes back to that all is one, as above, so below. Unfortunately, that also means sometimes there may be a little confusion moving forward. But luckily, most people, most writers, if they're not trying to hide their work or hide what they're doing, have things a little bit structured where we can tell what kind of sulfur, mercury, and salt we're looking at. So all of us have the four elements. Everything in the universe, we are all, and all is one. And so to be broken down as far as the model before, that would mean that all of the kingdoms, everything has a soul, a spirit, and a body. Alchemical sulfur, the soul, that is considered one's oil. For an example, if I were interested in lavender, going to buy an essential oil of lavender, that is the alchemical sulfur of that herb. The alchemical mercury is the spirit, also known as the alcohol. Oftentimes we go to the store and buy spirits. If you were ever wondering why they have that sign as far as spirits, it was to denote that we are buying grain alchemical mercury of potatoes and different grains, different plants. And then as far as the alchemical salt, that is the physical body, the form. And again, that is known as, again, salt. So we have oil, alcohol, salt, which is also one's soul, spirit, and body, the alchemical sulfur, alchemical mercury, and the alchemical salt. The reason why it's important to learn these terms before really getting into anything else is when utilizing alchemy to create medicines, we are taking sort of a raw form, say going along with that example of lavender, taking the raw form of a lavender herb, the plant, and to actually get its medicinal value, one could eat it, one could use it in tea, one could, use it in a variety of ways, but to really get the most potent medicine out of it, with alchemy, there is this idea of separation, purification, and cohabitation, of perfecting, moving towards perfection always, which is another one of the principles of the universe. Some of these other definitions, just to go over really quickly, infusion is to put matter into water, oil, vegetable glycerin. This is that separation piece. When, say example, I have a cup of chamomile tea, when I put the herb in hot water, the hot water acted as a transport to remove the alchemical sulfur and the alchemical mercury from the body. So the tea that we drink, the medicinal part of tea is the soul and the spirit of those plants, of those beings. A tincture is generally to put that matter into alcohol, ethanol. For the most part, depending on the nature of the plant, as far as how delicate or how rough it might be, this could look as far as using vodka or up to Everclear. When you start using things outside of herbs, that's a whole other story. So for now, we're kind of being focused more on herb work. So a tincture is that separation of the soul and the spirit into an ethanol. A spagyric is then the next step of a tincture. And again, if I'm going too fast at all, please let me know. A spagyric is the next step, where we really do that full separation, purification, and then cohabitation, meaning to bring back together. Spagyric is a combination of Greek words meaning to separate and reunite. Some of what I want to do is kind of really going for looking at how can we create our own tinctures and spagyrics in a way that's medicinal and appropriate for us, and perhaps even others. So before getting into a whole bunch of other theory and information, I wanted to get more practical. So this is really making the tinctures and spagyrics. The reason why I'm starting this now is once we know how it's done, then we start moving forward with some history and theory. Once we start looking at different reasons why we pick the herbs we pick, or when we pick them, or when we actually start the tincture or spagyric, it may make a little more sense. So this is guerrilla alchemy. As you can see from the pictures, from what I've done, I apologize for that saran label right there, just think plastic wrap. It's relatively easy to make one's own medicines in just a kitchen. All of these things I either got at a grocery store or I got from Goodwill. So I have not spent a lot of money, to be honest, to be doing this stuff. And yet the reward is pretty great. So making tinctures and spagyrics, as far as supplies, there's the herbs that you're going to want to use, jelly jar, plastic wrap, ethanol, either vodka or Everclear. And a little side note on that. If for any reason you may have a barrier to working with alcohol for any reason, using something as far as like vegetable glycerin or oils is always acceptable. You know, one, you want to be comfortable with what you're doing. It may not be as effective, but it doesn't mean it won't work. There are many ways of doing these things, which is another reason why I love alchemy. Is it is transmutable across multiple genres of what we want to look at and do. So it's really quick and easy. You just want to get a jar, fill it with your herb. You want to cover the herb with alcohol, and you want the level of the alcohol or the vegetable glycerin oil about 2 fingers above the level of the herb. You want to put plastic wrap over the covering of the jar and then put on the lid. The reason why we do that is because it's going to be shaking, digesting for about a week or 2. Alchemy is a practice of patience. Some things can take about a month to make. Other things, depending on how you're doing it, can take a few days. There have been a couple projects that can take a year or more. I have projects hibernating in cupboards and closets that have been there for months. I have a couple things that have been there for a year. So patience. So you're gonna have that herb digesting in that alcohol for about 2 to 3 weeks. Giving it a shake every day, and with that plastic wrap, you keep the alcohol and the herb from touching the metal of the top of the jelly jar, just to kind of keep it a little bit more, you know, purely just alcohol and herb, or vegetable glycerin and herb. The next step is what the pictures are here. After a period of time, you're going to see that the liquid is very darkly colored. This is going to be your tincture. For some people, that's good for them. A tincture can be used 2 to 3 drops in tea, water, juice, wine, whatever you would like. Some people even put a couple drops in their tongue or under their tongue. It is alcohol, so it is probably going to burn. I am warning you right now. But it's effective and it acts very quickly. If you want to continue to make a spagyric, what you have is when you strain it off, and here I suggest getting a second jar or bowl, having a strainer, a funnel, a coffee filter, cast iron skillet, or Dutch oven, something that you can light the herb on fire in, and then the mortar and pestle. So starting at the top picture on the far left, you can see all the supplies there. And as we move towards the top middle picture, there's this order of pouring the jar of herb and alcohol into the strainer to get as far as separate the herb, the body, from the soul and the spirit. And it's going to be draining out. The reason I suggest a coffee filter in the funnel is that anything that may come through, any other material, can be filtered as well. That was my dog. So you're going to have that second jar of your tincture. And what you have left, as you see in the top most right picture, is this massive herb. So that herb still has a lot of medicinal benefit. But unfortunately, there's a lot of extra unneeded material. So we want to refine it. We want to purify it. And the best way to purify it is with fire. So we calcinate that herb. It's been sitting in alcohol for about 2, 3, 4 weeks. So in a safe place, I happen to have a fireplace, which is lucky. Having that in a safe fire dish, putting it in and setting it, lighting it, allowing it to burn down. As you can see in the bottom right picture, the ash is still kind of gray. And so using the mortar and pestle, you want to grind that down. And then I put it in the oven and broiled it. Side note, this might smell. So fan, windows, I have set off a few smoke detectors. I haven't set anything on fire, but the smoke detectors always seem to go off. But what you want is a nice fine white ash, and that's going to be your salt. It kind of makes sense. So once you get as fine white and ash as you can by continually grinding down with a mortar and pestle, putting it back in to broil it, you are ready to cohabate, which is to reunite. So with that jar of tincture, you're adding the salt, the ash, directly back into the tincture. This again can sit for another week or two, shaking it up. And then after that, you're going to want to strain it again. I would suggest coffee filter because it'll strain most of that ash out. And that will be your spagyric. The reason why spagyrics are a little bit more potent for medicines is because they have all three essentials of the soul, the spirit, and the body in the medicine. Downside is they take a little longer. So it's really up to you as far as timing on what you would like to do and what that looks like. So now we have an idea of making our tinctures, making our spagyrics. So let's kind of move on as far as looking at how this can be medicinal and how we can make it really increase the power of its medicinal. So Aristotle came up with this theory that the four elements were, as they are connected, all is one. The connection really comes from the law of polarity. Polarity, many times people think of them as opposites, when really polarity is the same thing separated by degrees. An example of this is dry and wet. They're not opposite. They're just separated by degrees of dryness and wetness along a spectrum. And so by looking at dry and wet and hot and cold, Aristotle believed that the combination of these were the creation of the elements, and that's how they were formed, with dry and cold being earth, cold and wet being water, wet and hot being air, and then hot and dry being fire. Now, at the time, this was pretty revolutionary because as they went with this model, as they were looking at it, they started to find that if you shifted some of the conditions, some of the degrees of either dryness or heat, you transmute what you have in front of you. And if you can transmute earth to fire, fire to air, why not be able to transmute other things? And so this got people really excited. An example of that might be, a log being cold and dry. It's very earth-like. When you shift the temperature towards heat and add heat to a log, it catches fire and is consumed and transformed to fire. And so there's a lot of different examples of this. People were really excited about it. Kind of a brief history. I know we've gone a lot of theory, and maybe this is an interesting break, but it makes sense, I swear. So a little bit of a brief history. Alchemy was known as the divine art or the sacred sciences. A lot of records believe that alchemy was really situated around Egypt. And when explorers from the Mediterranean, from the east, from the south, converged to Egypt, they found that they had this divine art of medicine and transmutation, transformation that was divine, creative, and spiritual. Egypt back then was called Chemia. Chemia is more of the black arts, which is named for the rich, dark black soil that then now deposits on the sides. This is a very productive time of year because that is when planting occurs, that's when riches are brought up. So the time when the Nile deposits that soil, that really dark, rich soil, is the time when Egypt is at its height at that time, and perhaps even now. And so it became known for it. So this divine art was known as the Black Arts, Chemia. Alexander the Great, when he came in, he was very excited and he wanted to learn as much as he could. It became so well known that alchemists were the best healers that many people sent their young to Egypt to learn. And in fact, if you were considered royalty, or to be lucky enough to get an Egyptian trained alchemist for a healer, it was a big deal back then. Unfortunately, about 290 to 391, where Christianity and Rome was coming around, a lot of the knowledge was destroyed because it wasn't really seen as Christ-like. The great library in Alexandria, where all these works, all this knowledge, there were several burnings over time. And a lot of the art went east. And when I say east, I mean as far as like the Middle East. And a lot of as far as our ancestors, those who came before us, when they brought this knowledge to the East, it became a little bit more involved. As time goes on, things evolve, things change, things always strive towards perfection. It's here that Chemia gained its Arabic alchemia, which sooner or later translated to alchemy. So this is a table of correspondences. So this is really looking at a lot of the different qualities. So before alchemy moved to the Middle East, a lot of Greek philosophers and healers studied alchemy, and some of them even went to Egypt to gain some of that knowledge firsthand. Because of this, a lot of the way that they would heal was by humors. Humors is really looking at parts of the body and showing that if these parts of the body are out of balance, then that means that's how maladies, that's how illness occurs, whether that be emotional or physical. Hippocrates had the 4 humors of blood, black bile, yellow bile, and phlegm. These words are a little bit different than what we call them today. Blood is what we call it today, that has stayed. Black bile and yellow bile. Black bile was more of the secretions that were seen that came from kidneys or the liver. Oftentimes researchers believe that these may have been seen as perhaps blood clots. And so that was showing, as far as black bile, that there was something wrong internally. Yellow bile was seen as a secretion of the gallbladder and was seen to cause more of an aggressive nature. And phlegm, different than what we think of as today, while still water-based, was seen more of lungs and brain liquid. So from these 4 humors, as they sort of mature, Galen came up with these temperaments that, each of us have these 4 humors, much as we have the 3 essentials, but we are all individual people. All of us look different, we act different, our health is different. The amount of medicine that may help one person may be too much or too little for another. And so Galen came up with these temperaments saying that we have different measures of these 4 humors. Each of us have different, our makeup is different. And so he created sort of the 4 temperaments of sanguine as being connected to blood, which is sort of this air quality of hot and wet. melancholic, which is related to the black bile, which is sort of a earth quality of dry and cold. Choleric, fire, hot and dry. And then phlegmatic is water and cold and wet. Plato, Aristotle, a lot of different philosophers jumped on these and ran with them. There are still some places in the world today that use humor medicine, and it's effective. So it's interesting how that works out sometimes. We're going to touch more on this a little bit later, but kind of looking more as far as the actual temperaments. It got to a point where these temperaments almost became personality traits, where someone who is choleric was determined, quick to act, and fiery. Someone who's sanguine is a little more warm-hearted, outgoing, cheerful. Phlegmatic was sort of a slow, patient, and calm. And melancholic was a little more serious, anxious, depressed, or quiet. A lot of these words we still use today. Sanguine, I mean, we use that for blood, as you know. But as far as phlegmatic, as phlegm, as gross as some people find that word, it is a water word. Melancholy, to be depressed. That's sort of that earth aspect of that cold, dry, that sort of unmoving difficulty to move. And then as far as choleric, that sort of hot, fiery passion moving forward. They even named cholera after choleric due to the fevers that came along with it. So, bit of a side note, this is a great resource as we use the humors for these medicines. Again, this is where it may seem a little disjointed. There are other ways of also improving our tinctures and spagyrics. So, as many of us probably know, planets, days of the week are, and the Chaldean order are all connected. The chart I have up comes from a website. It's called Shadow Play Calculator. This is for today. I calculated it, and it's very easy. You open up the site, you put in the day, month, and the year, and it calculates planetary hours. It calculates as far as how those are split up, and then the order of them. So to kind of take a bit of a step back, the days of the week are connected to the planets. Back in, as far as ancient times of those before us, planets were the bodies, the celestial bodies that could be visibly seen with the naked eye. They didn't have telescopes. And so what they were able to see were 7 celestial bodies. It was the sun, the moon, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Mercury. What I find fascinating is that with their calculations and mathematics at that time, they were able to figure out the distance between Earth and the celestial body. And they put them in order as far as closest to farthest away. This is known as the Chaldean order, as far as how close a celestial body is. For some people who are doing alchemy, and perhaps you have an affinity with the other celestial bodies that were discovered after the invention of the telescope, such as Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. There's even perhaps another planet in between the sun and Mercury that they're discussing. I think they are potentially might, if it is a planet, they might name that Vulcan. These aren't really used as far as historical alchemy. They can be used, but most times they are connected to a celestial body that is already in this order. So for the purposes of today, to kind of keep things simple, I generally focus on the 7 celestial bodies used by those before me. Um, the days of the week are named after these celestial bodies. Sunday, the sun. Monday, the moon. Tuesday, the Spanish for Tuesday is Martes, Mars. Wednesday, Spanish is Miércoles, Mercury. Thursday, also known as Thursday, has been connected for Jupiter, gods of thunder, lightning. Friday for Freya is connected to Venus. And then today, Saturday, is Saturn. So what I like about the breakdown is a planetary hour changes as we move through the year. And the way that this looks for planetary hours is from sunrise to sunset is a 1 planetary day. And so that is split up into 12. And then from sunset to sunrise is the planetary night. And that is also split up into 12. So that we receive 24 hours in the day. As you can see at the top, for today, a planetary hour is 63.46 minutes long. So we are slowly inching towards the fall equinox. We are almost there. And as you can see, as we get closer to the fall equinox, the planetary hours get closer and closer to an hour long. As we go towards the solstices, they get as far as the planetary hour in a day becomes longer during the summer solstice. As we head towards the winter solstice, we will see the planetary hour for night become longer. During the split up, if for some reason one cannot use either a phone, internet, connect to this website, having a Chaldean order can be effective in being able to figure out what hour are we in. The reason why this is important is that as above, so below, herbs, many as far as like parts of animal kingdom and then mineral are connected to planets. They have this correspondence. And so let's see, we are at 11:47 right now. And so that means, looking at the chart, we are in the hour of Venus. Say I wanted to do a tincture or a spagyric of yarrow, which is connected to Venus, it corresponds. It would be a great time as far as strengthening that correspondence of Venus to yarrow by adding the ethanol into the jar at this time and place. By doing this, we increase the power of our medicines by connecting them to the celestial stars. This is also referenced at the end. So if anyone wants to figure as far as this website, that will be up. So one can't get away with doing a workshop on alchemy without at least one medieval painting. This is a wonderful painting. There are many, many varieties of the basically astrological person. And as you can see here, going through the astrological signs, those are also corresponded to who we are as people. And each sign corresponds with a particular body system, function, and part. Generally, as we can see, Aries, the beginning of the astrology cycle, starts at the head. And we move all the way down through the signs until we end at the feet and toes with Pisces. What's interesting is that many of the personalities and the myths that are correlated with the astrology connect to what they are correlated to as far as one's body parts. The reason why I got so excited about doing this workshop, as far as this idea of healing ourselves with stars, is this idea that there's all these correlations. And at one point, I actually asked Robert Bartlett, I actually studied with him this past year. I asked him, you know, how do they know? Like, how do they know that we have these correlations? Not only that, but I mean, these celestial bodies, you know, what about them? Like, what makes them correlated to us? What makes them have these effects on us? And what I love about Robert is that he is a scientist and a romantic. And so he shared with us that, you know, not only as above, so below, but truly looking at it rationally, you know, what we see generally can see us back. And the reason why the seven celestial bodies are so important is that they can be seen with the naked eye. That means that whatever light, whatever they are emitting, we are experiencing them. We can see them, we can observe them. We're being touched by them. We're being touched by all of the stars. And if we accept the fact that our sun gives off the energy in order to have life on this planet, then it can't be too far of a jump to expect, you know, Jupiter or Uranus giving off that light. You know, what does that affect? What do we gain from that? How do we grow? How do we change? So that's what really excited me about really recognizing that it truly is above, so below. So that's kind of a little bit scientific but more romantic side. Oop, I went back. But one way to make it a little bit all together, this is a graph from Poorman and Smith's Medieval Islamic Medicine. Again, alchemy went east, and so it really grew and flourished and matured while it was there. In fact, it was in the Middle East that glass instruments first were invented. It was an Arabic alchemist. So with this, we can truly see how everything is put into one chart, where our seasons, our humors, the elements, astrology, even the polarity of hot and cold and dry and moist can be all put together. And as we see, there is this, we can sort of, it's almost graph-like, where we can kind of place ourselves or look for, you know, where exactly would winter be? Well, it's winter, it's snow, which is cold and wet, which would be in the lower left corner. That's connected to phlegmatic and phlegm of water, also connected to old age. And so there's these ideas of moving towards. Another thing I really like about Robert is that he's a scientist. So he did a lot of graphs. And so one thing that I enjoy is really looking at the degrees. So polarity, again, we're not really looking at opposites, but we're looking at the degrees of that spectrum, that line. So as we look at this graph, we can see that line of wetness, dryness, wet and dry. The ancients believed that in the center was a sort of a perfect balance. Slightly to the hot and wet, which is a little more sanguine. The reason for this is that is where life flourishes. You know, that's spring. That's where life really comes alive. And so using this graph, if we go to the very center of it, and then go slightly up and to the left into sort of the wet hot. That is sort of the place where they believe was like the sweet spot of health. And as we look at the degrees, we can see as we move towards dry from the center, it, you know, things close, it dries, it strengthens, and then it hardens. You know, if we think of a wound, closing, drying, strengthening, and then the hardening is the skin reforming. For on the other side, as we the more wet one thing becomes, moistens, softens, nourishes, and then purges. That's sort of the flushing out. Again, these are that spectrum. Also on the graph is the y-axis of hot and cold. As we go up the hot, heat opens things up. As one gets warmer, we open up. A lot of times clothing may be removed because of heat. Things, you know, button coats are opened. Heat is opening. As spring comes, as things get warmer, seeds open, blooms. As you continue getting hotter, there's sort of a thinning aspect, it thins, it warms, and then it becomes burns. On the downside is cold, there's refreshes, you know, as far as a refreshing wind, a cooling wind. After that, sedates, which is sort of a cooling of slowing down, calming, and then anodyne. Anodyne is, again, in that polarity of burning, anodyne is that feeling of it's so cold, it hurts. Now, the reason why this can be helpful is looking at those medicinal herbs that we looked earlier. We can place that on the graph. These herbs and their associations were created this way by Nicholas Culpeper. And so as far as really honoring our ancestors, a lot of this work has been done for us. And so how can we take the thousands of years of work and experiments and trials and failures and really, you know, make them to our own advantage? How can we honor those, you know, bring them, continue to bring them into the future? And by doing so is to really look at, in this graph, how do the herbs fall? You know, how do they align? The reason why this is important is if for some reason, you know, one gets a burn on their arm, you know, if we look at the graph, in the far upper right corner is garlic and onions. You know, adding that to a burn is probably going to add more pain. It's going to create more of a burn. So we want to use the law of polarity to cancel out. Where we have malady, we want to use the opposite to heal. That polar opposite. Again, it's not fully opposite, it's the degree. So perhaps with burns, using such things in the hot and dry area, not as effective. Wet and cold, such as aloe, very effective. In fact, often prescribed for burns, still to this day. This can be done for all of these different herbs. In Culpeper, he wrote a book called Complete Herbal. I have that as well in the references. He goes through all of this, which is absolutely fascinating. There's pages of different types of food, different herbs, minerals, oils, materials, where he has collected data, not just from himself, but from all of the alchemists and herbalists, doctors before and around his time, and put it in giant lists. And so if you are interested in looking into that book, it's a fascinating read. Not only does he have lists as far as the herbs of what their associations are, as far as hot, dry, dry, cold, cold, wet, wet, and hot. There are a bit of degrees of where they are on the graph, and also their planetary alignments. An example of this is chamomile. So I pull that because I'm drinking chamomile tea. So chamomile is ruled by the sun, and also associations, correspondences. If I say something like chamomile is ruled by the sun, that doesn't mean that that is the only planetary association it may have. And it doesn't mean that perhaps you may see it associated with others. Our own intuition is also very important in this work. Oftentimes I like to use my intuition and then sort of do a backup check with the literature to see, just how close I can get. Chamomile being very, flowery, sun-like, has been associated with the sun. Also, as we look at the graph, chamomile is in the hot and dry. If we look 2 over and 2 up is in that square of hot and dry. And so chamomile can be used for a lot of great medicinal purposes. One being headaches. Headaches, as far as the brain, is seen as more phlegmatic, which is that sort of phlegm of lungs and brain. So that is wet and cold. So a headache being more on the cold side, for some people, perhaps ice is good for a headache. For some people, it worsens it. Chamomile being on the opposite side of that scale can be more helpful in remedying such a malady. One more thing that can be really helpful as far as all of this. So we've gone over creating tinctures and spagyrics. We've looked at connecting them with their celestial bodies as far as the associations that they have. The reasons those associations usually have been connected to them is due to either their aspects. For example, many poisons, which are often cold and dry, are connected with Saturn. Then again, some things are poisonous and might be more of a hot and wet nature and might be connected more with Jupiter. Whatever that may be, we're able to sort of have those connections and those associations. We can also, if we want to increase the potency of our medicines, as far as activating our tincture spagyrics by pouring on the ethanol, oil, vegetable glycerin in the hour of the planetary association. Another way of looking at it is looking at the zodiac. What phase of the moon? Where are we at in the zodiac signs? Is there perhaps, if you want to make a particular medicine for a particular malady, illness, maybe waiting a particular time of the month, a particular time of the week, or even sometimes a particular time of the year might be more suited. Of course, we can make these medicines at any point of the day or year. For some, they want to give that extra sort of push, that extra power of correspondence where everything is sort of aligned, and that just sort of stacks that medicinal value. Another way of looking at this is, what about ourselves? We're looking at herbs and how they correspond. How do we correspond on this graph? What are our associations? If we all have temperaments and humors, how do we figure out our own? And if we can figure out our own, is there a way that we can make a medicine that is suited just for ourselves and our own health? So there is a way, there are many ways of doing that. Just like many things in this world, there are many ways of doing that. A bit of a cheat sheet before getting into the way, like a very quick way that I like to do it is sort of a breakdown here. So the signs, air signs, hot and wet, fire signs, hot and dry, earth signs, cool and dry, water signs, cold and wet. Planets, Jupiter is hot and wet, sort of sanguine. Mars and the sun are hot and dry, choleric. Saturn and Mercury are cold and dry. And then Venus and the moon are cold and wet. And then the seasons are identified by astrology. So if the sun is in Aries, Taurus, or Gemini, it's considered spring, hot and wet. If the sun is in Cancer, Leo, Virgo, it's considered summer, which is hot and dry. If the sun is in Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, it's autumn, cold and dry. And if the sun is in Capricorn, Aquarius, or Pisces, it can be identified as winter, which is cold and wet. They've even broken down moon phases, where the new moon to the first quarter, hot and wet, first quarter, the full, hot and dry, full moon to last quarter is cold and dry, and the last quarter to the new moon is cold and wet. So the reason why these breakdowns are beneficial is by using our own signs and our own charts, we can then calculate what our own temperament is. So I used myself as an example. So if this is something that you're interested in doing, it can be pretty fun. It's relatively simple, although if you don't have a chart of your own, it's something that you can do pretty easily online as far as finding a planetary chart. It's beneficial to have one that has the full chart as far as like all the houses with that fun crisscrossing lines. So that way you can actually see the breakdown and pick out the planets in each house. With this, with a chart, you would follow the y-axis, the vertical axis, as far as the ascendant sign and down. And by filling those out, whatever your answer is, you then calculate using the previous correspondences, you know, whether that be hot, cold, humid, or dry. An example of this being, my ascendant sign is Leo, which is hot and dry. At the end, I have a C for choleric. The ruler, the ascendant ruler is the sun, again, hot and dry. And then the ascendant ruler sign. So my sun sign is Libra. And that is hot, and as far as hot and wet. And then you can kind of go through planets in the house, aspecting, moon phases, moon signs, and these can be answered from the previous list of correspondences. There's two ways of calculating this bank. The first is by calculating all the tally marks by all, adding all the hots. I had 7, all the colds, I had 6, all the humids, I had 4, and all the dries, I had 9. And then again, it's that polarity. You add the hot and the cold, the humid and the dry, and they cancel each other out. I hit the wrong number, it looks like, but my hot and cold cancel out, so I have 1 hot and 0 cold because of that cancellation. And then I have the 4 and 9, that's supposed to be 0 and 5. Because the 4 and the 9, as far as canceling out, there'd be 5 extra dry. So that breakdown is a 1 hot and 4 dry, meaning I'm very choleric. That's kind of where my temperament lies. That's sort of my go-to point as far as my own health and how I am as a person. Another way of calculating this is by actually looking at the far right column. You can see with my ascendant sign at the very top is Leo, is hot and dry. So I put a C for choleric. And by putting letters for each of the, as far as the planets aspecting my ascendant, I have 3 of the celestial, Sun, Jupiter, and Mars. So I have tallied those 3, and of the 3, it's 2 clerics and it's sanguine. So at the bottom, there's a table there of counting all of those. Again, 5 choleric, 2 sanguine, 3 melancholic, and 2 phlegmatic. So even with this tally, it shows that choleric is pretty close. It's my number 1. My number 2 as far as melancholic, but there's a bit of a gap of a score of 2 there. So it's a way of kind of checking one's work to see if, even though I did make a mistake with that math, that 4 is supposed to be a 5, it does sort of check that math and looking at both of them being choleric for me. So we are about 12:10. The reason why I asked for 90 minutes is because the last workshop I did last year, I didn't really leave a lot of time for questions. And this is a lot of information. This, I love Prezi.com. They have very interactive as far as slideshows, and I love being able to create them. What's also nice is that you can look up Prezi slideshows if you become, as far as they create a profile on there. It's free. I think they do have a pay option. I've never paid for Prezi. You can if you'd like, but you can do it for free, and you can access this as well if that's of interest. The other side is you can also reach out as far as my email, or I think that's something I forgot to put on as far as references, but that is something we can look at. So as far as quick references, again, Robert Bartlett, Real Alchemy is what got me started in all this. A lot of the information is in that book as well. A lot of the tables and graphs come from either Robert's book or from Culpeper, and that calculator to find planetary hours is from shadowplayzine.com, which is the Shadowplay magical calculator. So these are also part of the slideshow if there's any want to check those out. They can be very helpful as far as references. I would recommend them. They can be bought used anywhere, and the website is free as well. There's no need to make a profile. You can just go there and use it. So that is my presentation. It's 12:12. As far as I was given 90 minutes, so that means I have a commitment of another 18. So I have been seeing the chat flashing, and I don't know if that means that there are questions or comments. Let me see if I can pull that up, perhaps. But if anyone has any questions at this time, you can unmute yourself if you'd like. As far as it's a lot of information. I think I did it pretty quickly. And what I love about this is that it's there's so much more. Like, I've truly only scratched the surface with the things that I have shared. And so if this interests you at all, there is so much more to dig into. There's so much more to learn. I've been doing this for about 3 years now, and I can't believe how much there is. Thousands of years worth of data and information. So truly, with the theme of this year's Pagan Pride of ancestors, doing this, creating these medicines, having this be my craft and art, this is truly one of the ways that I love to honor the ancestors who came before me. So I will stop talking. Are there any questions or any comments before we end?
Yeah, everybody, this is Rachel, the host. And if you do have any questions, please do feel free to drop them in the chat. But if not, we can thank Sol, because that was an awesome presentation. And yeah, are there any last messages you'd like to convey before we all sign off?
I think that's pretty much it. I'll let everyone have a bit of a buffer between now and the next workshop. And again, this is kind of on public domain. I believe people access and download my other prezzies before. If you are interested in getting more information, or there's questions at a later time, or you go on Prezi and can't find this but are wanting to find it, I can always be reached through Puget Sound Pagan Pride.
Great.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the
thank
time.
you so much. We'll give you our virtual applause. Yay! And we hope to see everybody else at our next workshops. Anybody who's still signed on, I do want to remind you that we are also hosting readers, intuitive oracle card readers, starting at 1 o'clock today. So if you are interested, please check out our page for that. And thank you again so much. I will close the meeting, and thank you very much, Sol. That was an awesome presentation.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your Pagan Pride.